We often wonder whether there is any hope for the world today.
Why do we have conflict? Does my life have any meaning?
Good ideas enable us to flourish, but it often seems that bad ideas are winning the day.
What people call love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed.
So either I'm God or truth is relative.
I've come to believe that most people fall prey to one of 5 idea viruses.
Imagine the entire world being a secular place, not a sacred place. Darwin did that with the human person.
We see karma in Hinduism, we see karma in Buddhism, simply the idea of cause and effect.
Postmodernism has kind of indoctrinated people into believing that there are no objective moral norms.
Socialism says we all own it. When we all own it, nobody owns it. When was the last time that you washed a rental car?
Do you have the hope that you are confident of your salvation? And now I've never had a Muslim say to me, yes, I'm confident.
A growing number of people wonder, not just if God exists, but whether the question of his existence even matters.
In the busyness of life, it's easy to feel like God is absent.
We find ourselves locked in mortal combat in a secret battle of ideas about God.
As that video so ably points out, here at Summit, we're involved in a battle of ideas, and I want to give you a reason why that matters. I've been doing an informal poll of students attending the Summit Summer Conferences, and I've been doing this informally for about 3 to 4 years, where I would ask students at the open forum after my pro-life talks, how many of you prior to coming to Summit have heard in your churches a pro-life apologetics talk aimed at equipping you to talk about abortion with unbelievers. Now, on an average of about 180 students a session here in our summer conferences, we are lucky to get between 7 to 9 that raise their hand and say they've heard anything of that nature. If I go further and say, how many of you have heard anything at all about assisted reproductive technologies or euthanasia and doctor-assisted suicide, the numbers get even more dismal. You know why these summer conferences matter? And I'm telling you this as a faculty member. I'm not a paid Summit staffer. I'm a faculty member. And I'll tell you why these conferences matter. We are getting students, even from some of the best churches in the country, that are coming to Summit that have no distinct Christian worldview on the issues of human life, what makes humans valuable in the first place, and the first exposure they're getting to that is right here. So when Jeff in that video talked about a battle of ideas, that's the battle that we're engaging here at Summit. And I hope, if you'll allow me to do this, I hope each of you will go back to your churches, talk to your youth leaders, talk to your pastoral leadership and say, I want our kids at the Summit conferences this summer. We need them there. They need to be equipped to engage this battle of ideas. Because if we don't equip them, men and women, they are going to be swept away, or they will be non-effective in their witness for Christ because they will lack the confidence to engage. Both of those outcomes are disasters for our side. So I hope you will do as that video suggested and join us in equipping students to engage this battle of ideas. It's essential that we do so. We're going to do something a little different in this session. We're going to split the time between a little bit of lecture from me and then a conversation that Megan and I will have about some of the things we're getting in the field. What are the worldviews we're hearing from students? What are the things we're hearing about? But before we do that, I want to walk you through some underlying worldviews that come into play in debates over abortion, in debates over bioethics in general. And though we won't be able to get into these underlying worldviews in great detail, you will have enough of an oversight on this to know where to go to get more on what's really going on. The first worldview we want to talk about right now is a worldview known as morphological freedom. Morphological freedom goes like this. I have a right to literally morph into whatever I want to be, is a simple way to define it. It's a self-construction narrative that says I have freedom to use technology to reinvent myself any way I want to reinvent myself. I have the freedom to be in terms of how I identify, however I want to be. I can make myself whatever I want to be. That's morphological freedom, and you see it all over the place. Of course, not just in the culture on the popular TV, but you see it in debates over bioethics. But what you may not know is that morphological freedom actually is being sold to us in premises that all of us are exposed to daily. For example, I want you to think about social media for a moment. What does social media advance as a premise to each one of us? I can selectively choose what parts of me I let you see. I can make myself whatever I want to be on social media, and nobody can question it. I can go on Twitter and be something. I can make my Facebook profile whatever I want to be. And the premise there, innocent as social media might be as just an abstract principle, is actually beginning to ingrain in us this idea of morphological freedom. The idea that we can be whatever we want to be and no one can question it. It's just there. How about questions over assisted reproductive technologies? This is one of the topics we cover at Summit, assisted reproductive technologies. Infertility is an unbelievably heartbreaking thing for couples to face. If you doubt that, allow me to share with you what a graduate school professor of mine did. He brought his wife in who had suffered from breast cancer and infertility, and she had had double mastectomy, almost died from breast cancer. And he asked his wife in front of our class, honey, if you had to go back through infertility or breast cancer, you had to go back and go through one of those again, which would you pick? And she did not hesitate for a moment. I'd take cancer over infertility. It's that painful, emotionally. Think about what infertility feels like to couples in our churches that have to go through Mother's Day Sunday. What does that feel like? When everybody's little Johnny is giving mom a flower, but mom doesn't get, or this woman doesn't get one because she doesn't have a little Johnny. What does Christmas look like to infertile couples? This is a big deal. And how many of our churches are talking about this? And here's the danger. Morphological freedom tells couples suffering from infertility that they can use any means possible to construct children for their own parental desire, and as long as they get the kid that they want, everything's okay. Even if we destroy thousands of embryos in the process. Children being received not as gifts, but being constructed as commodities. That self-construction narrative is idling in the background on all these debates over abortion, over doctor-assisted suicide. How about the whole gay marriage, transgender debate that's going on right now? Morphological freedom says, not only do I have a right to decide what, quote, me is, unquote, I can make me into anything I desire. This is what's idling there. The idea that the body has no intrinsic purposes, the idea that I alone am sovereign in determining who I am. That's the idling worldview that is driving a lot of these issues related to bioethics. How about abortion itself? How is the abortion debate itself beginning to reflect this? Well, let me just review with you very quickly a couple of titles that are quite popular. Katha Pollitt has written a book called Pro, and the subtitle is temporarily escaping me, but I'll think of it in a moment. But basically her argument is, reclaiming abortion rights. The idea being that the way we win the abortion debate is to quit apologizing for abortion. Do you remember Bill Clinton when he became a candidate for president? He said, "I want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare." Remember that? Okay, that's now off the table. Katha Pollitt says, why does it need to be rare? Why are we apologizing? And she has a point, because as soon as you say abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, what's the obvious question that presents itself? Why? If there's nothing wrong with abortion, who cares how many there are? And Katha Pollitt gets this. So Katha Pollitt says, I'm going to write a book called Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights, and here's her argument. Vacuuming out your uterus is no different morally than vacuuming out your house. You don't apologize for vacuuming out your living room. Stop apologizing for vacuuming out your uterus. If you have the power, and if your identity says you need an abortion, you owe no one an explanation, period, regardless of what stage of pregnancy. Over in the UK, which, by the way, we just had a terribly tragic event go down in the UK. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but basically the British government imposed on Northern Ireland abortion on demand. Northern Ireland had resisted it. They have now been told they will embrace that, and they will embrace gay marriage, and it's being forced on them. But Northern Ireland was holding out when the Southern Republic of Ireland had voted to allow abortion wholesale. Northern Ireland was holding out until the UK government at Westminster forced it upon them. But the leading UK abortion rights apologist, a gal by the name of Anne Ferretti, sounds like a pro-lifer. Anne Ferretti would stand on this stage and echo everything Megan just told you. She would argue that there's no essential difference between a late-term fetus and an early-term fetus. In fact, Anne Ferretti mocks those who draw developmental lines on abortion, who say that this child over here can be killed because it's only 2 weeks old, while this one over here at 28 weeks can't be killed. She says that distinction is completely without rational merit. You know the SLED acronym Megan gave you? The differences of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency? She would agree with all that. And yet, here's her conclusion. If women are to have power over their own sovereignty, they must be allowed without apology to have abortion at any point in the pregnancy they want. This is the idea that I can become whatever I want even if I squash the rights of others. That's morphological freedom that we're up against. How does that relate to a Christian worldview? Well, the Christian worldview tells us a different story. I don't have the right to become whatever I want. You know why? Because I don't belong to me. I've been bought with a price. I've been bought by the King of Glory, who looked at me, saw my sinful rebellion, and still sent Jesus to die in my place as my sinless substitute. And the Bible says that I no longer am my own. I belong to him. And morphological freedom isn't the target I'm aiming at. Christ-likeness is the target that we're to aim at. Morphological freedom isn't bad because it's promoting freedom. It's bad because it's promoting unrestricted freedom with no bounds whatsoever. And that is why you're starting to see a little bit of shift in the abortion debate away from trying to justify abortion as, oh, well, it's not really killing a person, to, so what? Women have the choice. Deal with it. Second worldview we're dealing with is what we call body-self dualism. And I want to give you the title of a book that I think is the best layman's treatment of this topic out there right now. And both Megan and I would agree on this. It is by Nancy Pearcey, Love Thy Body. In fact, I do believe I think it's in the bookstore. I'm almost certain it's in the bookstore. Nancy has done a wonderful job looking at this problem, but let me define body-self dualism for you. Body-self dualism is the belief that the real you is not your body. In fact, your body has nothing to do with your identity. Your body is mere evolutionary matter in motion. That's it. There's nothing intrinsically valuable in your body. Rather, the real you is your thoughts, your desires, your aims, your cognitive abilities. That's the real you. Until you have those, or once you lose those, you are no longer you, no longer a person with rights. And your rights can be overridden by actual persons who still possess that. That's body-self dualism. Of course, it's easy to see how this fits in the abortion debate. We can kill fetuses who are less than cognitively aware because they don't measure up. And by the way, if you want a chilling example of this, look no further than David Boonin, who teaches philosophy at the University of Colorado at Boulder, not far from here. I'll paraphrase what he argues. Boonin says, you are identical to the embryo you once were. That was you back then. That wasn't a blob of cells, that was you. However, you don't have the same right to life then as you do now because you lack cognitive ability. So yeah, that's you back there, but you have no value until you get that. And to make sure we don't miss this, he cites his son Eli. He says, I got a picture of Eli on my desk. Eli is at 24 weeks before birth. He's got a sonogram image there. He's sucking his thumb. He is clearly the same boy that is in the other pictures on my desk, but the thesis I advance in this book is it would have been perfectly permissible to end his life at that point. Why? Because Eli lacks cognitive desires that are immediately exercisable. And you can see where this goes. The results of this are, as Megan pointed out already, you get savage inequality. If you have more desires that are immediately exercisable than I do, well, then you have greater rights than I do. Human equality is out the window. You can't have it both ways. You can't argue desires give us value and then say those who have more of them don't have more rights than those of us who have less. But what's really interesting about this, they never tell us why those things are value-giving in the first place. Megan pointed this out, and she's right. They never say, why is that decisive and not something else? They just assert it. But body self-dualism is also counterintuitive. I want all of you right now to look at this sign, or this screen, that says, beware the undercurrents, worldviews in play, all right? When you are looking at that, you are doing both a bodily action and a mental action. Your body, your eye, your physical eye sees the sign, but your mind makes sense of it. You are doing both body and mind activity. In other words, the real you is not just your mental, it's both body and mind. The Christian worldview would hold to what is known as a substance view. You are a dynamic union of body and soul. You're not only body, you're not only soul, you're a dynamic union of body and soul. Body self-dualism says, no, you're just your thoughts. How many of you have ever been hugged by your mother? Can I see your hands? Not if body self-dualism is true. Can you hug desires, aims, feelings? No, you hug bodies. Which means if body self-dualism is true, you've never been hugged by your mother because you can't hug those things. And yet the world is buying into this notion that the real you has nothing to do with your body, only your mind. There's a third worldview in play, and it goes like this. We should stay away from all metaphysical questions. This is a view called metaphysical neutrality. It sounds very big, very complex. We're going to make it simple. Metaphysics is not a word that should scare you. Metaphysics is simply answering questions about ultimate reality. Is truth real and knowable or just a preference? That's a metaphysics question. What are human beings? What is the nature of human beings? Are we body and soul or just material? That's a metaphysics question. What is the nature of reality? That's a metaphysics question. It just has to do ultimately with what's real. The view we're getting in the culture now is that Christians should not bring their views on abortion to the public square because Christians are engaging in speculative metaphysics, meaning ultimate worldview questions, while the secularists who support abortion are not. They are neutral, so the argument goes. So you get Senator Gillibrand from New York, who back in June said that the pro-life side should be fundamentally disqualified from all public debate on abortion. Fundamentally disqualified. What was her rationale for saying that? Because our view is inherently religious, and the religion of the minority should not be imposed on those who disagree. Now, idling beneath that is this view that somehow we should never bring larger worldview assumptions to debates about abortion, especially if we're going to bring public policy to the table. The problem, men and women, is that everybody does metaphysics on abortion. Everybody. Nobody can escape this. For example, here's the pro-life worldview. Humans have value because of who they are, in virtue of the kind of thing they are, creatures that bear the image of their maker, and thus they have intrinsic value, as Megan pointed out. What's the pro-choice worldview, the pro-abortion worldview? Humans don't have value in virtue of the kind of thing they are. They only have value if they have a certain degreed property that they have developed. Notice that both views are answering the ultimate question, what makes humans valuable in the first place? Do you see that? And yet what they try to do is throw ours out as being metaphysical when theirs is every bit as metaphysical. Everybody's doing this. Everybody brings worldviews to the table. And what's happening in the culture is a full-blown, full-court press to shut out the pro-life view because its alleged tie to metaphysics, when in reality, all views on abortion bring a metaphysical viewpoint to the table. Everybody does. Either you believe each and every human being has an equal right to life, or you don't. Both sides are doing that same worldview analysis. So that's the larger worldviews that are in play. But there's one internal thing going on you need to be aware of within the pro-life movement that is a very big threat to us getting our message out effectively. And just before I bring Megan up to chat with her about what we're seeing together in the field as we talk to students on these worldview, underlying worldviews I just mentioned, I want you to be aware of a rival to worldview thinking. My view is this: you should engage people at the worldview level, when necessary, address their underlying worldviews to open them up to consider the pro-life view. However, there is a rival view within pro-life that says, no, the real problem is we face a root cause problem. And root cause thinking differs from worldview thinking. And this will all be in your notes, as I mentioned at the beginning. Here's root cause thinking. We can't solve abortion if we don't first solve all the underlying issues that cause people to abort in the first place. So that means if we're going to solve abortion, we have to solve poverty. We have to solve the fact that people don't have the jobs they need. We need to show that we are pro-abundant life and solve every conceivable life extension issue that's out there. We need to be pro-immigration. We need to be pro-refugee. We need to be opposing poverty. I've even seen articles that say the opioid crisis is a pro-life issue. There are whole conferences within evangelicalism. I won't name them, but they meet in Washington, D.C. They are evangelicals who stand up and say, your pro-life credentials are not legitimate unless you're taking on all these other issues. This is extremely dangerous thinking to the pro-life witness on abortion. Frederick the Great put it well, he who attacks everywhere attacks nowhere. What does this look like in the real world? Are people like Megan and I supposed to spend Monday fighting abortion, Tuesday fighting the refugee crisis, Wednesday fighting poverty, Thursday fighting the opioid crisis? I mean, you see where this goes. This is insane. If we stand in front of a high school, last year we reached 72,000 students at LTI. Are we supposed to take 5 minutes of our talks to talk about abortion and then we have to work in all these other issues? What does that mean? And how are we supposed to spread our resources to even deal with all that? Most pro-life groups you meet are completely broke. Do they have money to take on all these other issues that people with bigger budgets are more than willing to take on? Look, just because you oppose the intentional killing of an innocent human being does not mean you have to fix everything wrong with society. What would you think of the American Cancer Institute? Suppose a critic said to them, "You're not really concerned about health because you only deal with one disease, cancer. What about heart attacks? What about diabetes? What about childhood obesity?" I mean, we would think that was insane. Or what if a Christian daycare center opens in the inner city and they allow kids to come to them between 3 and 5 p.m. weekdays so moms can go home and make dinner? But the rest of the time they're closed. Would anybody go to that Christian daycare inner city ministry and say, "Why aren't you open 24/7? What are you doing about older kids? What are you doing about gang violence? What are you doing about the root causes that cause these kids to grow up in poverty in the first place?" No, we applaud them. It's only you, pro-lifers, who are told you have to take on all these other things to earn your pro-life credentials. And I want to tell you, men and women, that is bunk. Do not fall for it. Now, as Christians, will we care about a lot of issues? Yes, we will. But it doesn't mean our operational objectives are going to be that broad. And the danger here is, even if we did everything that our critics are demanding of us, suppose we took on all those other causes. Would pro-abortionists suddenly become pro-life? If we did everything they said, would they? Would they help us stop abortion? No, they wouldn't. It's one gigantic smokescreen. So your job is to deal with the underlying worldview issues which helps us solve abortion. Your job is not to take on every conceivable job under the sun, fixing everything wrong with society to somehow earn your pro-life credentials. That's not fair to pro-lifers, and it's not fair to you. So what I want to do now is bring Megan up for our final 20 minutes, and we're going to talk together. We're just going to have a conversation about what we're seeing in the field. Megan is one of our top speakers, you already know that, and we actually have 2 other speakers at LTI that go into schools. Our focus is to go into Catholic and Protestant high schools and do assemblies and do talks where we reach students with pro-life apologetics content. Now, a lot of groups go in and talk about abstinence and chastity. We support groups that do that, but that's not what we do. We do the pro-life apologetics, and I thought it might be helpful if you got a sense of what we see on the road and what we pick up. So, Megan, I got a question for you to start off.
Okay.
On this question of body-self dualism, give us an idea of some of the things you've heard from students that indicate that this is indeed a challenge that we have to be ready to talk about.
Oh, it's all over the place, really. But I think the number one thing I run into goes back to that body-self dualistic idea that somehow my feelings, my thoughts, that's the real me. And so when they begin thinking about the things that I've said, they'll say, "You've made some really good arguments, and I understand all that you've talked about, but what about when these situations arise? Mm-hmm. What about when this happens?" Because suddenly that changes the feelings-based center towards an issue. So I see that quite a bit, but I also, when I have time to do Q&A with students, unpack body self-dualism for them. Because I don't think people walk around and say, "Oh, well, I'm a body self-dualist." It's not something that people claim to be, but it is there.
I dare you to post that on social media today.
That wouldn't be your view anyway. No, but the ideas that are running underneath, they are there in such a way that when I begin to unpack it, I have students raising their hands and putting the dots together and going, "Wait a minute, what does this mean for things like euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide? Wouldn't that mean that if that person has lost their mental faculties, that there's no longer a person there? Is that the view driving that?" They begin to understand the connections behind. So both sides, they fall prey to it in terms of reasoning through, but the moment that you begin to explain the underlying worldview, they're the ones who begin making the connections and going, "Oh my goodness, that makes so much sense of what I'm seeing on TV with this whole hookup culture idea, because if I could, according to body self-dualism, do to and with my body whatever I want, because it doesn't really affect the true me, as long as it satisfies the true me, well, then no wonder people are having casual sex. But what we're seeing, the outcome of that is that the Christian view, the substance view, that our body is so much a part of what we are that you can't separate the two, that's the reality that we're seeing play out, because what we do to and with our body does affect us. And the secular statistics are showing that with the increase in things like depression and things like suicide. It's incredible.
One of the things you'll hear from pro-life sources is that we are winning the debate with students, that this younger generation is very pro-life. There are pro-life leaders who will say things like, this is the generation that's going to end abortion. I'm not so sure. And one of the reasons I'm not so sure is I meet enough students who have bought into body-self dualism that they say they're pro-life, but they have no adequate foundation for really being pro-life. You know what their pro-life conviction really comes down to? They don't like anything that looks mean. Abortion looks mean, therefore they oppose it. But guess what else looks mean to these students? Denying someone the right to marry whoever or whatever they want. They think that's mean too. In other words, under body-self dualism, my body tells me nothing about what I ought to do morally. My plumbing means nothing. All that matters is up here in my desire. And that's why you have people who identify as men when they're really women. That's why you get the transgender activism that you see today. And these very same students who tell us they're pro-life, push them hard enough, and they'll think it's mean if you restrict a woman's right to choose when you come right down to it. Yeah. And they certainly don't vote pro-life. So this idea that we're winning this fight at the worldview level, I think can be challenged. I don't think the evidence will support that. And I realize I'm not giving you an empirical study here. I'm giving you what we're seeing in the field on this.
Yeah, I think the flip side of that, because when we do engage it, and that's what happens, it does happen here at Summit. I've seen it happen. I've walked with these students because I live here, so I'm here for most of the sessions the entire time. Is there are also positive things about this generation. You're absolutely right, because I run into the same types of things. There's an intense fear of not being kind or not being perceived that way. I think that's where this view of morality being subjective is coming from. This I don't want to tell someone they're wrong, because that would be in some way unkind to them, right? So the intentions to be kind are there, but once you point out what's really going on, and that viewing morality as it truly is something that is objective, in which case that means that when I say that abortion is wrong, I'm making a statement about reality, the kind of statement that, because it doesn't rest on me, could be right or wrong. That's actually a humble stance in a world like, and as soon as you begin to unpack that for them, they begin to retool their understanding of kind. The positive things that we see here at Summit is that this generation is incredibly energetic. Oh boy, they're hard to keep up with. They see the suffering in the world on a global level because of the technology that they have. So unlike me when I was younger, I saw suffering. I saw it on the news each night. I saw it in the community in which I lived, in my own school, in my own context. They see it all around the world from 14 angles, right? And they want to fix it. So when they think about fixing the world, they want to do it at a global level. So they do care about these things. And as soon as you can tap into what's going on under the surface and help them understand, their energy is directed in a very positive way, which is incredibly encouraging.
One of the other areas we see here at Summit, and it certainly frustrated me at first, and I think from our previous conversations it frustrated you, was on the question of morphological freedom. We introduced a bioethics talk to the Summit students about 5 years ago, and we are constantly modifying that thing because of just the changing nature of where these students are coming from. But one of the things I would do is throw out a case study to these students. If you had an opportunity to take an enhancement therapy that would fundamentally alter your biological DNA, but would give you cognitive abilities way beyond any other human being, and that therapy would affect your descendants as well, are there any yellow or red flags from a Christian worldview that say maybe you shouldn't just rush headlong into that? In other words, we're talking here about altering the nature of human beings through a therapy, their biological nature. we were finding, at least in my summit sessions, a lot of pushback from students saying, well, what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't we do that? Why not? Yeah. And I want you to take a few minutes and talk about how you help students see this through the use of media. We decided we were tired of trying to fight this on terms they couldn't understand. I mean, think about it. This generation has been raised on superheroes.
Yeah.
I mean, I wear a Spider-Man shirt. I have a shirt I lecture in. It's got Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, and the students marvel at my shirt. That's a bad joke. But anyway, you get the idea. I'm sorry. But this is a generation raised on these. So what did you do to kind of start them thinking about, wait a minute, maybe there's some fundamental questions we need to answer first?
Yeah, it was what happened to me is what it was, because I was coming up on my turn to give the same talk that summer. And I was thinking through that after you had experienced the first session and had that kind of pushback. And I was praying about this. I'm like, Lord, how do we help them see that there's something not okay here? And I was wrestling. And I remember I was on a speaking trip with my husband, Tripp, who he works here at Summit as a director of programs. And we were in Denver. We were supposed to be flying back to Atlanta, and we got snowed in. And I was so angry. We'd missed our flight there in Denver. And he's like, we're going to turn this into a positive. We're going on a date night. So he took me to see Wonder Woman, which I had been wanting to see. And just number one thing, when your wife is a pro-life apologist and you take her to movies, you just kind of learn to deal with the fact that there's going to be a different kind of movie-going experience. My kids hate watching movies with me because I stop the movie, we have to talk about this. So I was watching Wonder Woman, and it got to the end of the film. Great film, by the way. And just like in the other films, Superman would be another example. There's a lingering sadness that the character experiences at the end. The reason is that she is a divine character. She's not human. And here she is in a world, living in a world not fit for her, but longing for this kind of ideal human existence. And in that moment, the Holy Spirit just struck me blind. I was like, oh my goodness, that's it. And so what came out of that was men and women, when I was talking to the students, and we always address them as men and women because that's what they are. If we were to enhance our nature to such a point that we surpass human nature, in other words, if the transhumanist movement takes flight and we're no longer human in the way that we once were, and if our goal is to achieve this ideal human existence, and I think that is the goal of people trying to strive for these things, if we take these enhancements, if we do these steps and surpass our nature, we will never achieve our goal because we won't be human anymore. We'll be living in a world not fit for us. Who wants to be immortal in this world anyway? That's usually the question that gets them. They're like, well, yeah, listen.
Yeah. And notice that we have a generation of students that is rushing toward enhancement, rushing toward bettering ourselves, but they can't tell us what better means, and they can't tell us what human means.
Yeah.
This is, again, something our churches need to take account of. What are we teaching our students about what it means to be made in the image of God and to be truly human as a result? And that leads to something else I want to take some time with before we let you all go. We need to send these people home with something to do.
Sure.
We need to give you an assignment, and we want to give you some tools for fulfilling it. So what I think all of you need to do, and if you oppose me, you're welcome to oppose me. You'll be wrong, but you can. Here's what you need to do. Our churches, your churches, are full of people who have not been taught to defend the pro-life view. After this session today, you actually know how to defend the pro-life view. And when you see the exquisite notes we have given you, you will have no doubt about that. And you can pick up books like my book, The Case for Life, in the bookstore, and my book, Stand for Life, if you want further assistance on that. But here are 3 things every kid and every Sunday school in your church needs to be able to do. How many of you have churches where there's a Sunday school program? Okay, good. Youth groups? All right. You need to start working on your youth pastor. And you need to begin, you have 2 options there. You can give the talk yourself, which I'm going to tell you how to do in about 90 seconds, or you can call one of our staffers. Megan lives locally here, and we can get a speaker out to you. But here's what your youth group must understand. Number one, they need to understand a biblical view of human value, that we are made in the image of God, and abortion is an assault on that biblical view of human value. They need to know how to simplify the issue. Trot out your toddler, the example we gave you. This debate is not about choice, privacy, or trusting women. It's about one question: what is the unborn? That's where the whole debate stands or falls. Then, let's say you forget all that, and all you can remember is, okay, they argued science and they argued philosophy. Distinct, living, whole human being. You give them that, and let's say you then go through SLED with them. There's no essential difference between you, the embryo, and you, the young adult, that would justify killing you. Differences of size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency. That's that SLED acronym we talked about. None of those are good reasons for saying we could kill you then, but not now. Let's say you have 10 minutes to talk to these kids. In addition to giving them that, you show this video. Let me go a step further. If all you did is show this video, can you imagine the profound impact that would have on the students watching this? We're a generation that learns about the world visually. They used to learn about it through TV. Now where do they learn about it? Their phones. And the visuals help overcome at a visceral level the roadblocks people have to believing in the pro-life view. So those are some things you can do. The notes will help equip you with that and will help give you a step forward. Megan, what are you seeing in schools as relates to students who claim that maybe they were raised Christian, but now they're falling away, they don't want anything to do with it anymore, and they hear a pro-life talk based on science and philosophy? How does that help? How have you seen that help point them back to Christianity?
Yeah, well, because we're talking about human dignity, and that's the basis when we're talking about pro-life issues or bioethics issues. It comes back to, what does it mean to be human? That most fundamental question. So what I find when I'm doing my job, when I'm teaching apologetics, is that these conversations lead to gospel conversations more than any other conversations that I have. And so even yesterday with the student body, I was at a school in Fort Worth, Texas yesterday morning, flew in just before the snow, praise God for that, and got here. But I spoke to 900 students for 50 minutes, and they sat still and engaged. I could see their faces, and I'm asked all the time, I don't think high school students would really be interested. I don't think they'd pay attention. I can tell you that's not true. They were listening with rapt attention, so much so that a group came up afterwards and talked to me for so long that their teachers had to come and go, no, you really have to eat today. You have to go to lunch, and then you have class. And they were like, well, just 5 more minutes. Can you walk with us to class, Megan? Can you do this? Because they had questions, and they wanted to know more. So the more questions they have, all apologetics does, it's important to understand this. The things that we gave you today paves potholes. That's what my professor, good Dr. Kevin Lewis said. Paves potholes. So when they bring up their objections, what ends up happening is these materials help you kind of push those objections aside, those obstacles aside, and it clears the path. And I cannot tell you the number of times I can name students on a first name basis. I can remember a boy named Michael. I can remember a girl yesterday named Ashley. And these objections that came up, the more you knock aside, the more it opens up. And all of a sudden, 1 minute we're talking about, but how can you say humans are valuable based on that when we talk about these evolutionary theories and so said this and this and this, and as soon as we get past that, the next question or the next thing out of their mouth is, I'm so angry with God. I was so hurt when this happened to me. And sometimes it happens so lightning fast that I'm praying on my feet and just I'm almost taken aback. And then we're talking about real things. Don't you remember who you are? Don't you remember that you are an intrinsically valuable human being made in the image of God? That is who you are, not this problem, not this struggle, not these things that people are saying about you. That is what is most true of you. And I think the best thing we have on our side, because I can tell you that the storytellers do drive the culture. We all know that. We see it happen on a day-to-day basis. Guys, every single one of us in this room and every single one of you sitting at home has a better story to tell other people about themselves. You get to remind them who they are.
Yep. If I could sum up this, it would be this way. Our church leaders need to know they can win on abortion. Yeah. They're fearful they're going to lose, that people will walk away. Here's the opposite. When you actually give an intelligent defense of the pro-life view, it draws people. And I want to give you an example by pointing you to the next base camp that's going to happen in February, in late February, or early February, pardon me, in Peachtree City, Georgia. My friend Michael Sherrard at Cross Point Church will be hosting the next Summit Base Camp, so stay tuned for that. The title is going to be The Ethics of Tomorrow. They've arrived. How young adults are making important decisions. So it's going to be dealing with some of what we've talked about here. What is the engine driving decision-making process in today's youth? That will be the topic for our next Summit Base Camp. But I want to close our time today with a story from Pastor Michael Sherrard, who will be hosting that next base camp. A year and a half ago, Pastor Mike preached on abortion. He showed the video you just saw. He spoke conclusively on it. He used scripture, he used apologetics. Unbeknownst to him, a family in his church had brought a friend from Spain, a Spanish intellectual atheist who thought Christians were nuts. And that guy came to church that day just to be polite to his host because they bugged him. That says something about us. We need to be willing to bug. That guy listened to Pastor Mike. And when Pastor Mike got done, that Spanish atheist made a beeline for Mike. And he looked at him and said, I do not know what to do with you. You have defied every expectation I had coming to church today. You presented a logical, rational, thoughtful, persuasive case for what you believe. I did not see that coming for a million years. Now, I'm told that family has had ongoing discussions with this guy. The conversation, just as Megan pointed out, is continuing. And this guy is progressively opening up to Christian thinking because somebody opened him to pro-life thinking, and that doesn't surprise me one bit. When non-believers hear Christians make a case for the pro-life view that's persuasive and engaging, they think to themselves, maybe, just maybe, Christianity has something else to say I ought to look at. Hadley Arkes was a Jewish philosopher at Amherst University, written brilliant books on defeating moral relativism. He was pro-life, but an atheist. An agnostic Jew would be the kindest way to describe him. What brought him over to theism? He told us, I was drawn by the Christians who defended the innocent. And I began to think if they got this one right, maybe they got other things right. So you can be a witness for Jesus even in your pro-life advocacy. So for the rest of you, those of you online, thank you for joining us today and being part of it. Those of you here, thank you for braving the snow and being part of this and not being chicken like some who might have stayed away. We don't want to call our fellow Summit people chickens. Well, sort of, we do. But we are really glad you're here. And remember, our next one is going to be in early February. And again, the title will be The Ethics of Tomorrow Have Arrived, How Young Adults Are Making Important Decisions. God bless you guys. We appreciate you being here.